We're back on the TD with some more reverse assembly process. Yay! So yet again, this car makes for a good example of probably the most common mistake that the average home restorer makes when restoring a car. Once they get far enough to where the paint is on the car, they want to assemble every body panel. And then they step back and say, it looks like a car again. Yay! Because it's very emotionally satisfying and helps with motivation to move forward on the progress on the car. But it's the wrong way to go about it. You get a car assembled with all the fenders and running boards like on some of the TCs and other older cars. And then you start going through the rest of the assembly, like putting the wiring harness in and putting all the stuff on the firewall. Then you're always leaning over the fenders. And you're always, stepping over the running boards. And you risk damaging them every step of the way. I mean, what if you're putting on a horn and you drop it, fumble it, and you drop it on the fender? Even if you have it covered with something, you're still likely to ding it or knock some paint off of it. I never, no matter what I'm restoring, put the fenders on until the car is running. The engine's completely bedded in, everything's assembled, all the wiring, everything. So some people may not do it that way, but that's how I do it. Get the body on the chassis, get the radiator and grill shell in place, and make sure the bonnet fits properly, especially if you're not the one that did the body work. Now in my case, if I would have done the body work on it, I would have already known that all these stuff was adjusted right and that this all fit before paint ever went on it. So I would know that as I bolt it back together, we're probably not going to see any problems and everything will fit, but I would still double check it. And then take all the fenders and everything, wrap them up in blankets, and put them someplace safe. Don't even think about putting them on at this point. Same thing with the bonnet. Once you know it fits, put it someplace safe. Start running the wiring harness through, loading everything onto the firewall, get everything in place, all the brackets, the horns, fuel pump, everything in place. Get the exhaust manifold on, all of the exhaust system completely on, get the cooling system completely together to where it's holding coolant, get the fuel system completely together, get the carbs intake, everything on it, or in the case of this one, the supercharger, which I much prefer with a supercharger to start out with just carbs only. Get the engine running, cam bedded in, everything broke in, make sure everything's good with the engine and there's no surprises. Then take that off, put the supercharger on. But the original carbs are gone. I guess he sold them or something. He does not have them anymore, so we can't do that. But that way you can do all of this work. It's so much easier to reach in and work on all this stuff without the fenders in the way. On anything, MGA, MGB, Spitfire, whatever, or not Spitfire, the TR6, whatever. Doesn't matter what you're working on. The fenders are not in the way, you're not leaning on them. You don't have to worry about trying to protect them. You're not going to scratch them. And it's just easier to reach in and you can get closer to it and do everything you need to do within the engine compartment. Get it to where it's running and you know everything is good. Even test drive it before you hang the fenders on it. And it's also a good example of why many shops simply will not touch a part-way done project, and why I usually don't, but occasionally do. Most owners are not going to understand, why are you taking it back apart? Why are you charging me labor to take it apart and then put it back together. It's like, well, because we've got to. In this case, I wasn't going to take the fenders off. I was going to go ahead and try to work around them, even though it's much more of a pain in the butt to do. I didn't want to take them off. But in order to fix all of this area around the cowl and make everything actually fit, it really couldn't do it properly with the fenders in place, so off they came. But in order to take the fenders off, that means the front apron has to come off, bumper, all that stuff has to come off. But that also gives me a chance to be able to get in here and clean all this stuff up, because it's got 15 years of dust and dirt on it. I'm sitting in his garage, and now we can clean all that stuff off a whole lot easier without the fenders in place. So now that we got all this tore apart, next thing I'm going to work on is actually getting all of these pieces of wood in here properly, and to where the bonnet actually fits like it's supposed to. And then once I get that done, then we'll start working on all the brackets and everything on the firewall and try to start getting all this stuff buttoned up. Once I started pulling all this wood out, I realized that this car was painted without any of the wood in place, and then the wood was put in afterwards, which is not actually the way it's supposed to be, but I do understand why they did it that way, because a lot of people actually like to just put some shellac or some other clear on the wood and see that wood, but that's not really the right way to do it, because the stuff can move around too much. You at least at a minimum want to have all this stuff fitted, drilled, everything done and bolted together before paint, and then take it back apart. I don't even think this was done that way. I think the wood just wasn't even done at all until it was painted. Well, now that I've been tearing into this thing, we found out exactly how this thing was put together and how it was painted. It was obviously painted without the cowl panel in place. Normally the cowl panel is pinned in here and then leaded across the back here, and none of that was done. So this was all painted without that in place. So when I see it like this, I pretty much say, yeah, I can see why it didn't line up. Because that stuff all really needs to be put together before, while you can jig it. But these weren't screwed in to the screw holes here, which this one here is stripped out, so I'm gonna have to probably use the old toothpick trick. So we'll get this all screwed back in place, and then there was no screws running into here, which there should be, to hold everything in place and hold everything nice and tight while you drill. And same thing down here. And interestingly enough, these things here are lefts and rights, and it's all because of the angle in which this is cut. And believe it or not, they had them on the wrong sides, to where the angles were completely the wrong way, and they had to jam them in there and made it not fit well. So we're correcting all these mistakes. Now at this point, it starts begging the question, should I take it even further apart, and would it save me time in the long run? Well, I'm not sure about that. At this point, I'm going to start working and trying to line this up and think about that a little bit more.